Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. This video is part 2 in a two-part series looking at the 3.17 challenges and looking at what you'll need to do in this video if your goal is to get 32, 34, 36, 38 or all 40 of the challenges done in this league. The first video covers the 28 challenges that I consider to be the easiest because it wasn't clear, there are 24 easy and then there are a bunch of harder ones. It's more that there were 28 that I felt were the easiest ones, and then there were 12 that were considerably harder. So most of you that are coming into this will probably have those 28 challenges done, but if you need any pointers on them, there is the video that I put out earlier, which is my pathway to 24, and you can definitely have a look at that if you're interested. Link down in the description of the video below. If your goal is to go for 32 challenges, general notes that I think this is a lot harder in solo self-found than it is in trade. Now, it's always harder to get challenges in SSF than in trade. But transform items is the clear 32nd easiest challenge, and it is much harder because it's so RNG focused. It is actually much harder in SSF. For an SSF player, it's probably going to be your 36th challenge or something like that. Your pathway to 32 in a trade league probably involves hitting about level 92, then farming a few exalts worth of gear, then starting to work on the weird challenges. So if you're not yet at level 92 and you don't yet have a few exalts worth of gear, focus on just making your character more powerful first. Then you'll come back and with a razor focus on the challenges and getting them out of the way. If your goal is to go a little bit further and get 34, you're going to need a bit more damage than you do for 32. This is because you're probably going to want to do one or in SSF both of the boss hard modes. These are much easier encounters if you've got overwhelming burst damage. Now when I say hard modes, what I mean here is Atlas bosses in style, which are two encounters that require you to beat some of the new pinnacle content without being damaged by certain skills. You'll probably also need to do the unpleasant, messy, and long Archnemeses 3 challenge. Now, Archnemesis Monsters 4 was actually in my easiest 28 video, but Archnemesis Monsters 3 is actually harder. So that one is going to show up in this video as something that you're probably going to want to do here. Start saving your rarer Archnemesis recipes like effigy accordingly, because you are going to want to get that Archnemesis 3 out of the way. The 36 challenges. This is easier than 36 challenges has been in most other leagues. The hardest encounter you're going to need to beat for this is likely the feared Run Scoured. For comparison, the hardest challenge that was on my pathway to 36 in 3.16 was running the feared Release simultaneously. If your goal is to go for 36, you should aim for level 95 and about a dozen exalts worth of gear first. And then at that point, you start chasing down the things you need to do for your challenges. And if your goal is to go for 38 or 40, this is easier than usual. In my opinion, getting 40 challenges this league is the easiest it has been since 3.8 Blight League, which was, I think, at the end of 2019. There are a couple of RNG heavy challenges in this league, but they're quite a bit easier than in previous leagues. So for solo self-found, the most RNG heavy challenge is Duel Master. You will require a timeless duel to complete this one, and those things are rare. Those things only spawn from Legion encounters and mostly from the domain of Timeless Conflict. They're extremely rare drops in the domain of Timeless Conflict, and you just don't get many chances at that encounter. So if you are going for 40 challenges in SSF, you need to keep that in mind. You need to be focused on getting Legion emblems as early as possible, because you're going to need a bunch of them for Duel Master. In all modes, whether you're in SSF or trade, Olroth for Knight's Terrors is the other one that is really quite nasty. You will want to spec into Expedition. You will want to spec into Expedition and save those Danig logbooks because you are going to need them. So in solo self-found, prioritize Legion and Expedition farming now. If you're in trade, getting the Timeless Duel is trivial because you can just trade for one and even trade it away later. But you will again want to get your hands on an Olroth logbook as soon as possible. Doesn't actually need to be one that has the implicit contains Olroth. Those are very expensive in trade, like many exalts. You can just get Danig logbooks and eventually you'll find one. So a logbook that has a Knights of the Sun encounter can potentially contain Olroth. It's just not guaranteed. So the 12 challenges in this video are Archnemeses 3, Transform Items, Eldritch Beacons, Night Terrors, Boons of the Atlas 2 and 3, Elderslayers, Mysterious Orbs, Master of the Atlas, Atlas Bosses in Style 1 and 2, and Endgame Grinds. The other 28 were in the Pathway to 24 video. Now I'm going to put these in roughly increasing difficulty order for Trade League. Where SSF widely diverges from Trade League, I will mention that. Solo self-found players may wish to skip Transform Items and Night Terrors. Those are the ones that are particularly nasty, as well as Duel Master, which was in the Pathway to 24 video. Vendor recipes is also included again here for reference. If you want to download this presentation, you can do it from my blog, sirgog.com. Again, link down in the description below. And it's in the easier 28, the vendor recipes one, but it is just useful to have a list of what all those vendor recipes are. And also Duel Master appears again in this list, even though it's not part of the 12, because it's super hard in SSF. So vendor recipes, this was covered in the last video, won't go through it again. The main thing is that for Exalt Shards, you want to use your Shaper Scarabs or your Elder Scarabs in order to compile a set of rare equipment, one item for every slot that is influenced with the same influence. You're going to get heaps of Shaper Scarabs when you start pushing into red maps, so you'll have no trouble doing this, and no one wants Shaper Scarabs this league. They're not very good as consumables anymore, and so their primary use case is actually just the Exalt Shard farming recipe. Eldritch Beacons is the easiest of these challenges, so this is like the easier version Eldritch Altars, and it almost can't be avoided once you're at endgame, but it does take considerably longer. If you do 100 tier 14 plus maps, you're going to get this. This is the one that requires you to do 30 maps for the Maven, 30 for the Searing Exarch, and 30 for the Eater of Worlds. Maybe you already had this before you started watching this video. It's really straightforward, but basically run a variety of influences at endgame. You can't miss this one. Boons of the Atlas 2 is the next one I wanted to cover. So this is the one that requires you to set up a few things that the Atlas can help, your Atlas configuration can help you achieve. So for shrines, this is to have 3 shrine effects on you at the same time. Now this will probably happen by accident even if you don't spec into shrines. You can make this easier by speccing heavily into shrines on your Atlas, and if you're having trouble with this, then definitely respec some of your Atlas points so that you've got more investment in shrines. But you'll probably get this one by accident without even trying. I know I had it before the time I hit level 80, I had this done, and I hadn't tried to do it. For the Syndicate, here you just need to fight 4 of the Syndicate members, including a Safe House leader, in the same encounter. All this really takes is doing a Safe House encounter, usually. Maybe your first Safe House won't count, maybe you'll need to do 2 or 3, but once you've built up a few friendships and rivalries on your Betrayal tree, which really will only take you 3 or 4 June missions, even if you're not going out of your way to bring people together, you'll get this by accident without trying. The Atzoatl option is the next easiest one here. Now this requires you to open a Temple of Atzoatl that has 4 tier 3 rooms, 4 or more tier 3 rooms. Here you just want to spec into the cluster on the Atlas that has resource reallocation on it, and use a few of your Elder missions, and you'll get this one with ease. The other 2 options that you've got, there's the option to fight a Legion Sergeant inside a Ritual Altar. That can be done just by releasing a Legion and then dragging some of the monsters from that Legion all the way over to a Ritual encounter, then just starting the Ritual. Once the Ritual is started and that Legion monster has walked in following you, then you kill that Legion monster. And this is clunky and awkward, and whilst I would be happy to do this if you need to, you don't need to because there's 3 easier choices. Likewise, the other option is to kill a Delirium boss and a Beyond boss within 10 seconds of each other. This can be done very easily if you apply a Delirium Orb, at least 1 Delirium Orb, to a map that already has the Beyond mod on it. And then once you do that, go through that map looking for a Delirium boss. When you get one, start beating it down so it's pretty low in life, then spawn a Beyond boss by killing a big pack of monsters together, and then kill them both at once. This is easily enough done, but it's also completely unnecessary because there are 3 easier choices: Shrines, Syndicate, and Atzoatl. And I think most people will just get the first 3 and then forget that the other 2 are options. Archnemeses 3 is next. Now this is the one that requires you to set up 3, your choice of 3 from a list of 5 or 6 different combinations of Archnemesis monsters. The first thing I need to warn you here is that Effigy is an absolute wrecking ball. I know I'm repeating myself from Archnemeses 4, which is surprisingly easier than Archnemeses 3 and thus was in the other video, but you really want to fight the Effigy in an environment where you will not be able to kill yourself through reflected damage. Even your minions can kill you because the reflected damage isn't reflected to its source, it is reflected directly to you. You want to kill the Effigy monster entirely with damage over time, even if your character is not normally spec'd for damage over time. Pick up a Tabula Rasa, stick in an Essence Drain, level it a few times, and you'll be able to do this. The Effigy monster won't be all that hard, but you will definitely want to get it done with that setup. Otherwise, you're going to have a nightmare. The rest of them are all pretty straightforward, but this is going to take a lot of stuffing around. You need to go out of your way compiling these recipes and just using the in-game Archnemesis recipe system to track what you need. I will also put a link down in the description below to an Archnemesis recipe listing. If there's recipes that you've got that are undiscovered that you need, they can help you with this. Ultimately though, this one is just going to take you time and mindset. That is, I have the effigy mod I need. I'm going to save it aside until I've got the frenzied mods I need, and I'm just going to put it there. I'm not going to use it frivolously. I'm just going to sit on it until I'm ready to do this recipe. As long as you've got that mindset, you'll have no trouble getting Archnemesis 3 done. Transform items is next. So this one is a major hassle in solo self-found. This requires you to use 4 obscure methods of transforming items within the game, and basically 3 of them are trivial. So you need to use Jorgen in a safe house. And this is something that all you need to do is just have Jorgen in your syndicate setup and get him into research. When he's in research, you just need to finish a safe house with him, and then just throw any old amulet. You don't need to care about that amulet. Just throw any amulet that you've looted off the ground into the Jorgen talisman bench. Boom, you've got yourself a talisman. Harvest, change one unique to another is another thing you'll get easily, as is using an ancient orb. Those 3 are trivial. But then you've got 2 that are very RNG heavy. So firstly, you can assemble a Harbinger unique item. This requires running the beachhead map many times. If you're in a trade league, you can just simply buy 3 pieces of an item. So you can buy the first piece of directions, second piece of directions, third piece of directions, and just assemble them until they look like they fit together. And once you've done that, you'll have yourself a Harbinger unique, and you've done this. In trade, that's easy. In solo self-found, you will need to get your hands on a lot of beachhead maps to do this. The best way to get beachheads, as far as I can tell this league, is actually not running Harbinger content. It is running Delve content. Delve seems to drop a lot of Harbinger orbs, and Harbinger orbs have a 20% chance to turn a map into a beachhead map. The other option is that you can do an incursion upgrade. This will require a lot of Elver missions on average. Usually what you'll need to do is save all of your incursion specific upgrade items. So this is things like if you got the slave driver hand, gloves, or any of those sorts of items, the Omessian boots and the like. Just save the base versions of the items and save the vials that you get until you've got a matching pair. When you've got a matching pair, then run yourself an Elver missions chasing down the tier 3 sacrifice room. When you've got that sacrifice room, you've got all the pieces you need to do this. Ultimately, this challenge is going to take a fair bit of stuffing around if you're in solo self-found, because you've got to do one of 2 RNG-oriented things, but they are things that you can target farm a little bit, so it's not in the nightmare category, but this is definitely one that you probably only get if you're going for 36 in solo self-found, whereas it's probably on your path to 32 if you're in trade. Next is Atlas bosses in Style 1. So this requires you to beat the 2 mini-bosses whilst avoiding certain mechanics that they use. For the Black Star, I recommend overwhelming damage as an option here. Your other option is logout abuse, and your third option is hiding behind the ice pillars to avoid astral avalanche. So one of the requirements is that you beat the Black Star without taking damage from astral avalanche. This is the harder one. The easier part of this is that you also need to beat the Black Star, not necessarily on the same attempt, while it is rolled to have increased monster action speed. For the Infinite Hunger, it is a pure DPS race. There is nothing more about it. There is a certain threshold of DPS below which you cannot possibly achieve this hard mode. Actual DPS threshold for that is not very high, and so you should be able to achieve that on most characters, although maybe not on your first try. Don't feel with the Infinite Hunger that you need to do both hard modes at the same time. You can do one of them on one run, then on your next run you can do the other one. Night Terrors is next. Now this is something that's much worse in solo self-found than it is in trade. Olroth is the hard part here. You need to get your hands on a logbook that has Knights of the Sun encounters in it. They will have a chance to have Olroth in them. However, Olroth is only in about 1 in 15 of these encounters in my experience, so pretty uncommon, pretty rare. If you're in solo self-found, you already need to be spec'd into Expedition. If you aren't already spec'd into Expedition, spec into it now. Use all the Expedition scarabs that you get from general loot. You may also want to fish for more of them by vendoring your completely unwanted scarabs. So remember that there's a vendor recipe, 2 of the same scarab plus 1 horizon orb equals 1 random scarab of the same tier. Note that this has to be monster level 81 or higher. Don't fuss about doing expeditions in 13 and lower. It's tier 14 and up that really matters. Kurgle is uncommon in Delve. If you delve to 250, you will find a Kurgle, but 250 will take you some time. Again, this is something that's easy to team up with another player who is doing a lot of Delve. That will make a lot of these Night Terrors encounters easier. A Munamu is uncommon in Abyss content, but you can definitely spec into a node. There is a node that makes it twice as likely to get an Abyssal Depths, and when you do get a Depths, for it to be 50% more likely to have a Lich at the end of it. Maybe it's the other way around, maybe it's 50% more likely to have a Depths and 100% more likely to have a Lich. Whichever way, that node triples your chance of finding a Munamu, and that will really help you. The actual fight against a Munamu is pretty easy though. For Katarina and Ulnatol, these are much more targetable. Remember that for Ulnatol, you need at least a tier 2 upgrade bench for a minimum, because it needs to be monster level 81. So you will then need to get It That Fled into the research division of the betrayal system, get it up to at least rank 2, and then do your safe house run and get yourself your Breachstone upgrade. Next is Atlas bosses in Style 2. Now, whilst these bosses are a little bit easier than the Atlas bosses in Style 1 encounters are, the hard modes are a little bit harder. The Exarch side, again, is pretty easy with overwhelming damage. Here, there are two things you need to do. One of them is beat the Exarch when it has physical damage added as extra fire. This is actually scarier than it sounds because the Exarch debuffs your fire resistance. So that's not trivial. It just means that the Exarch is going to do a lot more damage. The second mod that the Exarch requires you to do is to not get hit at all in his bullet hell move. So during her bullet hell move, you're going to be absolutely blasted by these meatballs that will roll across the screen. You can just mechanically dodge these by using a teleport move skill, and I recommend Flame Dash for the purpose. It's a lot of fun to try and get this down pat. However, the quicker you can beat the Exarch, the less of these meatballs you're going to need to dodge, and that ends up being a pretty decisive factor in the easiest way to do this. So the path of least resistance for this fight is definitely to burst her down as quickly as possible. For the Eater, don't try to do both mods at once. Chilled Ground will really make it hard to do this without beginning to drown. So you're going to want to do these two separately. And for Softcore, focus on not drowning. It is perfectly fine to just let the slam kill you. Just ignore its mechanics. Focus on not drowning so that when you go back into the fight, you can then end up just bursting him down. That's the way that I think is the easiest way to do it. If you're in hardcore, you're going to need to play this one very, very, very carefully because you will need to pay attention to the mechanics of the fight, and that's going to make the fight a lot harder because just to clarify what beginning to drown means, beginning to drown means that you are being touched at all by the balls that sort of sweep around the arena. Those balls, if they touch you for a short period of time, they slow you and they cause your vision to contract. If they grab you for a long period of time, then you will die. So for the Eater of Worlds, that mechanic is fairly easily, it's fairly difficult to dodge for the whole fight. Again, the more damage you've got, the easier it'll be. Next is Mysterious Currency. You need to use these 3 currency orbs plus 2 more. Remember that you only need to do 5 of the 6 currency orbs, and that is an absolute godsend here. Eldritch Chaos, Eldritch Exalts, Eldritch Annuls. These are uncommon drops from map bosses, maybe even pretty rare, and I think they only drop when there's Eldritch Altars in play. However, you will get all of them by the time you've done a couple of hundred tier 14 maps. The Exceptional Ichor and Embers, these come from the bosses, and the Orb of Conflict comes from the Maven. One of these fights is much harder than the others. That fight is the Maven. You do not need to do the Maven, because you do not need an Orb of Conflict, you only need 5 of these currency orbs. The clear path of least resistance here is to use all of the 3 that, all 5 of them that do not have the word Eldritch in them, and skip out on the Orb of Conflict because it is the hardest one to source yourself. Another mention of Duel Master here. This is something that is easy in trade, but in SSF is brutal. You need a Timeless Duel for this. Sorry, SSF players. There's nothing really I can say about this other than this is going to hurt. You are going to need to farm a lot of Legions in order to get access to the Domain of Timeless Conflict for this one. There's nothing more to say. Get farming Legions, spec into it even if you hate the Legion mechanic, use all your Legion Scarabs. You are going to need to do a lot of Legion grinding to get that one. You also need to do an Elder or Uber Elder, and you'll need to do a few of them, but you're probably going to do that anyway on your pathway to 36 or 38. Master the Atlas is next. This is to unlock all 12 of your favorite map slots. Mostly this comes down to doing the feared. So you need to do a wide variety of endgame bosses, but only one of them is genuinely difficult, and that is the feared. You'll need to kill things like Cyrus, who is not trivial, but is miles easier than the feared as well. So to unlock the Elder and the Shaper, you'll need to fight their Guardians. You get the Guardian maps by spamming high tier maps. To get the Cortex, you'll need an RNG drop. This is rare, but not staggeringly so, from tier 14 plus maps. To get the feared, this is the hard one. You need to do the Cortex, and you need to do it with Maven Witness, as well as Chayula, as well as Elder, as well as Shaper, as well as Uberatsuri. And then you'll have to fight all 5 of them in one Maven arena. That fight is very difficult, and you might want to get help from another player for that. But of course, you can also give it a shot yourself first. There'll be plenty of people that might be able to rescue you if you make an attempt and aren't able to succeed at the fight. There'll be some powerful boss killers that will be able to go in and do it all for you. That said, the feared is pretty difficult. It is a bit easier than the next thing you're going to need to do though. And that is the Elderslayers. This one's really odd in that 5 of the 6 things on this are so much easier than the last. So this requires you to defeat Baran, Veritania, Drox, and Alhesman, all in areas with at least 80% item quantity on them. You need to defeat Cyrus, the Awakener of Worlds. All of this is fine. All of this is stuff that, these are not trivial boss fights, but they're also not really at the top tier of bossing in the game. Then you have to defeat Maven's Invitation, the Elderslayers. Just Maven's Invitation, the Elderslayers, is only a little bit easier than Maven's Invitation, the Feared. It's up there as one of the hardest boss fights in the game, but you also need to beat it when it's got 4 map mods in place, so it's so that it is item quantity 60% or higher. Sometimes actually 4 is not enough. Sometimes you need 5 map mods in play. That is basically really a brutal fight. And ultimately, Maven's Invitation, the Elderslayers, is a wrecking ball with 60% quantity. There's nothing more to say about it other than that this is the hardest fight that's required on the way to getting 40 challenges, and will dwarf the difficulty of things like the precision boss kills for Atlas Bosses 1 in style, Atlas Bosses in style 2. Lastly, we've got the 2 that are a significant grind. So Boons of the Atlas 3 and Endgame Grinds come next. By this point, you should be at 38 challenges. You should not consider doing either of these unless your goal is to go for 40, except maybe if you're an SSF and you got absolutely stuffed around by the Legion Jewel, or you got absolutely stuffed around by Olroth, in which case maybe you're going to be stuck doing one of these on your pathway to 38, or else maybe you'll just migrate into Trade League and then buy the one you couldn't get. So warning, Boons of the Atlas 3 is a significant grind. In fact, it's enough of a grind that for some players, this is going to be your last challenge. You will do Endgame Grinds before you finish this one. So, the path of least resistance for solo self-found here. You are still going to want to use 100 scouting reports. You're going to need to spec into more of these dropping on your Atlas. So there is a Kirak cluster near the center of the Atlas. You're going to want to spec into this so that you get the extra 60% more drops of scouting reports. That's going to be essential in order to get you 100 in a reasonable time. You're going to want 4% chance for harvest to spawn in maps on top of the base 8 to get that up to 12%. And then at that point, you're starting to look like you only need a few hundred maps in order to get all the relevant harvests that you need. And then you're going to want to get metamorphs as well. Metamorphs, even though 60 is a large number, you'll get a lot of polished metamorph scarabs dropping from various content that you're doing, especially with Eater of Worlds influence on maps. And you'll also get rusted ones as well, so you'll be able to get a metamorph in virtually every map, plus you'll have wild metamorphs. These will give you all of the pieces that you need in order to get your 60 sets of metamorphs done. It won't be quick, but this seems to be the path of least resistance in my mind for doing this. Remember when you're setting up your Atlas that you will also need legions for the timeless jewels, and you will need expeditions in order to encounter Olroth for Knight's Terrors. So this is going to put a lot of constraints on what you can spec on your Atlas. You're also going to want to have the Eater of Worlds nodes because they're so good. And then that's going to mean you won't have all that much left over after that for your own favourite mechanics. However, you will still have enough points to take them. For Trade League, things are going to be a little bit different here because you can save a bunch of time on this by doing blighted map rotations. Blighted maps, getting 50 blighted maps in solo self-found, I don't feel is something I can recommend. I don't think it's something that's all that plausible. However, in solo self-found, in Trade League, getting 50 blighted maps is very much more doable. But even better is doing blighted maps in groups with other players. When you do maps in groups with other players, you'll all get credit. And so if each of you has 5 blighted maps ready to go and you group together with a group of 4, then that's going to give each of you the credit for 20 blighted maps. That's going to make this a lot easier. And you can also just have one person stay behind and loot their own map while everyone else in the group starts up the next one. So you want to buy 100 scouting reports, you want to do your blighted map rotations, and then you can just pick whatever else. You'll probably like one of the other mechanics there, and therefore you will just get that one by the fact that you're playing the game. Endgame Grinds is next. This is the biggest challenge in Trade League and second only to Boons of the Atlas 3 if you're in solo self-found. Path of least resistance here, as I see it, is step 1, earn all of the Void Stones. Spec into increased Shaper and Elder Guardian map drops, so that's the cluster above the top of the screen here, where above the Maven's head on the Atlas is the Shaper and Elder cluster. That will increase the number of Shaper and Elder maps that drop for you. Step 2 is going to be to map a lot in Quad Sextant Tier 16s, farming loot and making your character more powerful. Do Archnemesis encounters while you're on your way, do Labyrinth Trials while you're on your way. Then step 3 is the painful choice. Either trade up to 100 Shaper and Elder Guardian maps or push to level 100. Both of these options are viable, both of them are going to take you a while. I'll leave the choice up to you. For solo self-found, speccing Shaper and Elder maps early is more important, as that's a clear path of least resistance. You'll get more Shaper Elder maps than you will get of the Conqueror maps, and so Conqueror maps is not really going to be an option in many cases. You'll get a limited amount of base splitting options, so use those to split these maps. You might get some fractured fossils as well. So where that's possible, use these methods to split your maps so that you get to run them twice. That won't happen much. Or alternately, if you're really masochistic, you can push level 100. Anyway, that's all I've got. May your Volobs have interesting results and all of the best on your push to 40 or 38 or whatever you've decided that you've set as your goal for this league.